Hi, this is a tutorial to show you how to join crochet squares when you're working back and forth in rows. There are quite a lot of tutorials out there to show you how to join crochet when you're working in the round, but back and forth in rows is something that perhaps we do a little less often. So I thought I'd show you how I do it. So here's my happy Scrappy Squares blanket that I'm just making out of sock yarn, and as you can see I'm making squares, but I've also got patches that aren't square. I've got sort of patches where I haven't got so much yarn, so I'm just making rectangles. So my squares are 25 stitches across and 13 rows high, and then whenever I get a bit that's smaller I just stop it wherever, and sometimes I've made a larger rectangle and sometimes I just keep to the square shape. But I'll just show you how to sort of join on the squares to the right hand side and how to add a new colour. So as I say, to start, this was my original square, this one here. So the yarn end would have been here. So that's what you need to make sure, that you've got the working yarn to your left so that this first row is the right side. So I like to match my squares up so that if I've got the right side on this first row, I want the first row of this one to be on the right side, so that as I work each row it looks the same. Otherwise I think it'd probably look a bit more messy if you didn't do that, but it's up to you whether you think that's important or not, I guess. But I'll be doing it that way because that's what I've done so far. So as I say, each square I join to the right of the original one. So I might just do one square here and then start joining, or I can work up and do several squares and then start joining more. It's fairly flexible from that point of view. So let's go over to the right hand side of my blanket. So my next one I'm going to join is going to be here. So I think I'm just going to try and bring this up closer. I think you can hopefully see that that's the right hand side of the stitch, and then this second row is the back of the stitch. So when we're adding a new yarn, which I'll just get here, when we're adding a new yarn, it will be into the bottom of the turning chain that we used to make the first row. It's quite hard to see, but what I'm going to do is work into the very bottom chain. So normally we'd work into the back loop, but when you do that with this method, because you're only sort of, the yarn is pulling away to the right, that loop, let's see if I can get it closer up for you, is going to pull away and is going to become quite gappy, which I don't think we want. So what I tend to do is just lift the front loop up, so that's the top of the chain and just the front loop. So I've only got one loop over the top of my hook at the moment, but when I take my hook through to the back of my work, which was how I'll actually use it, you can see I've got two loops there that are in the same direction that the yarn will be pulling, so it makes it stronger. So as I sort of pull against them, it doesn't open up and make that big gap, which is very hard to show you on here, but I hope you get the idea. So one little strand of the chain over the top and two on the bottom, sorry, and two over the top is the basic idea. So let's get our new colour and just pull that through. So now if I work some chains, just a few so you can get the idea. That's how it'll look. So the chains are all coming off of that the bottom of that stitch. I mean, it's actually a chain, but we're going to treat it like a stitch. So I'll just do a quick few. I won't do as much as I'd normally do for a square, just to speed things up for you. And then once you get the number of chains you need, just start working back with treble stitches as you normally would. So I've worked back along, and I've just got the original chain to work into now, so I'll make a treble stitch into that. And then to join, so that joins the bottom of the first row to your square. So now we need to join the top of this row. So we're going to make a slip stitch into the top of this first stitch of the first row. Now this is actually our turning chain on this row, so we've got to put it into that top chain, which is a little bit difficult because it tightens up. It's already got one stitch worked into it. But if we just force the hook through there, and then we can pull the yarn through and make a slip stitch. So that joins the first row on. So now we want to start working back another row. Now normally we'd turn the work now and do our turning chain, but we're going to do it slightly different for this. So I do one chain here. Because I've got the slip stitch, I'm counting that as a chain. Now I'm doing one more chain, and now I'm going to make another slip stitch, which I count as my 3 chains. That would normally be my turning chain. Now you can do 2 chains here if you think that looks better, but I find just one, so works best for me. So I've done my slip stitch, which is 1. I've done a chain, which is 1, and now I'm going to do one more slip stitch. So this second row needs to be attached to the second row of our square that we've already made. So it just needs to go into the top of this treble stitch, or DC stitch if you're from America or Canada. And so that's a lot easier because it's just a stitch and it's a little bit more flexible. So again, just pull the yarn through and make a slip stitch. So that joins the second row on. So now we're ready to work the second row, and now we've got our joining, we can actually turn over. So if I turn the blanket over, you can see the working yarn is sort of coming across the front of our stitch, which looks slightly unusual compared to how it would normally look, but that's okay because we're going to sort that out later. So the other thing to bear in mind is that this sort of bit that's this new yarn in blue, which is joined to our yellow, that acts as our first stitch. So we don't need to work into the first stitch of our row below as normal. You wouldn't normally work into your first stitch. The chain would act as your first stitch when the same thing is here. It's happening here, but it's just a little bit more unclear to see. But it does work out right, is what I'm trying to say. So if you skip the first stitch and work into this second stitch. Let me just get this so you can see it. So skip that first one and work into the second one. There we go. And then carry on making trebles along. And then when you get to the end of the row, you can just chain and turn as you normally would. So that's the second row added on. Now I'll show you again because it is slightly different when you're not working into the chain. So I'll quickly whip back for you. So now I've got back to the stage where I've got one more stitch to work into there, and then I've got my first sort of joined on chain that's also we're counting as a stitch. So first of all I'm going to work into the penultimate stitch, which just looks a little bit different. I'll see if I can get it a bit closer so you can see. It just looks a little stretched out, that's all. But all you need to do is exactly the same thing as you normally would. Just make sure you lift the 2 chains. Pull that through. And then to make the last stitch, we've actually got to work into this tiny little bit here, the slip stitch that's joining it on. So I'm going to yarn over because it's a treble, or double for US terms, and I'm going to get it under those 2, and then we want to pick up that extra strand, which was the working yarn that we brought to the front. So if you can see at the back, not really, there's that little tiny bit there. I want to get under that as well. There. So I've got 3 on my hook. I've got the front 2 loops of the slip stitch, and then I've picked up that bit of working yarn. I mean, this step isn't critical, so if you can't see this and this isn't very clear, I just find it tightens it up a little more, so I quite like to do it. But yeah, if you really can't see what I'm doing, I wouldn't worry too much as long as you get it into the slip stitch. That's the main thing. So let's complete the stitch. So I'll pull through and make the treble as I normally would. So that's the bottom of the stitch attached. Now we just need to attach the top of the stitch again. So again we're working into the top of this stitch, which, as it's a wrong side row, a right side row, sorry, is the turning chain. So it's into that top chain. And pull through. It's joining those rows on. So I'll just show you one more time. So I've done my slip stitch, I work 1 chain and then a slip stitch into the top of the same row on the other square. Then I can turn my blanket over and I keep that working yarn in front of that stitch. So I turn, which way did I turn? Anti-clockwise, didn't I? So, and that's the loop that we'll be picking up when we come back. So then we can carry on. So again, this joined chain that we've made counts as our first stitch, and we'll work, so we'll skip that and we'll work into our second. So here we are again. We've worked along row 4. We're now doing row 5, heading back towards the square we want to join to again. So we work into the penultimate stitch again, which is the same as normal. It just looks, get this out of the way for you, just looks a little bit more stretched out. But I just work it in the normal way. And then I've got to work into that little slip stitch there. So I push it, force it under those 2 loops, and then I pick up that strand over the back there, which is the working yarn that got in the way. So I pick all of that up, and it's worth pointing out, by the way, there is still a strand underneath, which is the normal strand that would be there. But the working yarn, the way we wrap it round by turning after we've done the stitches, it makes the working yarn make an extra loop that we're just tucking out of the way now. So I complete the stitch and then join it onto the top of the row. There we go. So that's how I'm joining each of my squares on. So I'll just quickly tell you how to work it if you want to add a different colour. So if you want to join a new colour yarn, there's two things that might happen. You might end with a wrong side row, in which case you'll finish working here at the far side of the square. So that's easy. You can just grab your new yarn, make a chain of 3 and work your trebles back in this direction to the square that's already existing, and you can just join on as you normally would and carry on working. But if you've just finished like I have on a right side row, so you've ended your work here, you're going to want to join your yarn here to work back. So let me just quickly show you how to do that. So what we want to do again is to work our sort of joined turning chain, let's call it, from the front, so that when we turn everything's in the right place. So for this, because we've just finished with a slip stitch, we can actually work nicely into the top of the stitch, so, and the slip stitch can stay neatly out of the way. So we'll put the hook into that top of that first stitch, and we'll just join some new yarn on. And then so we're going to join our yarn, and then we're going to make 2 chains, because this time the slip stitch is on the other yarn. It's not on this one. So this is our first 2 chains of our turning chain, and this slip stitch, which we will use to join to the top of the row, will work as our 3rd chain. So we'll make a slip stitch into that top of that stitch and pull that through, and that's our first stitch. So now we can turn the work again, and again we're ready to go off in the same way. So we've worked directly into our first stitch and made our chain, and now we're just going to carry on. So once you've worked all the way along and then back again, you're ready to join again in exactly the same way as you did before, because the top of our joined turning chain will be the same. So work into that slip stitch there, and again just pick up the loop. See if I can do it so you can see. Pick up the loop of that working yarn there. And pull through all of them. And then to finish that row, join to the top again. So there we are. How to join and how to join a new colour.